Hey, and welcome to the Vineyard Church of Lenoir City's podcast. Our vision at VCLC is to see Lenoir City as it is in heaven. This summer, we're studying the book of Ephesians, a powerful letter that speaks to identity, unity, and what it really means to live a life shaped by grace. While we're happy you've joined us here, we'd love for you to join us in person. Grab some free coffee at 9:30 a.m. and worship with us at 10 a.m. every Sunday at North Middle School in Lenoir City. You can visit us online at vineyardlc.com. Thanks again for listening, and let's get right to the message.
This could be seen as almost as a part two to what we talked about last week. It's one continuous thought. But before I get into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about anatomy. Pinky toe is the smallest toe. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, unless you have like an abnormal foot. A pinky toe is the smallest toe on the human foot, but it serves a big purpose. It serves to provide balance, especially when walking, running, or jumping. And many people don't know this. I didn't know this until I started to study it, but our feet are actually tripods. See, the three middle toes actually don't make it. It's actually your big toe, your little toe, and your heel. There are three touch points on the ground that provide stability. These three contact points provide weight distribution for your whole body, which makes it easier for you to stand for long periods of time, walk for long periods of time, run, jump, and other things. If you lose your big toe or if you lose your pinky toe, you're limited in your walk. You really are. And I learned this the same week. There's a lot of trauma in the way that I broke both of my pinky toes, but it happened nonetheless in the same week. The first time that I broke my pinky toe, or in that week, the time that I broke my left pinky toe, I believe 10 years old, 10 or 11 years old, and I went into the pantry, and I don't know if you guys remember this, I don't know if they still make them, but Ragu used to make, dump it in a bowl, and then there would be like sauce that you'd squeeze on top of it, pop in the microwave for a little bit, and then you would have like noodles, essentially. My mom had bought that for us, and I was like, I don't want to mess around with that. If I'm eating pasta, I'm making real pasta. And so at 11 years old, I'm like breaking the spaghetti and cooking it in the pot, and then it's time to go and grab the sauce to put onto the pasta. And my mom bought, does anyone else shop at Costco? 5-gallon drum of pasta sauce. It wasn't really that big. She bought a massive bottle of pasta sauce that I was supposed to put on my pasta. And at 11 years old, I went to go grab it above my head to pull it down. And when I got to about face level, it dropped out of my hand and directly onto my pinky toe and snapped it. I heard a pop. Glass shattered, went everywhere, and pasta sauce went everywhere, but in my 11-year an artery. I was like, I'm bleeding out. This is it. This is how I die. It's pasta sauce on my little toe. It's hard to even confess to this in front of people right now. I thought I had nicked an artery in my kitchen with a bottle of pasta sauce. The second time happened just a couple of nights later. I had gotten up in the middle of the night to go and get myself a snack. My dad, you inherit things. For whatever reason, the one thing that I've inherited from my dad is a love for peanut butter and milk. I do not know why, but usually at night, I will get up and I will get a spoonful of peanut butter and just eat a spoonful of peanut butter, and then I will have a massive glass of milk to just wash it down. I have done that my whole life, ever since I was a kid. And so in the middle of the night, I'm like, I need my peanut butter fix. And also Jif only, get away from me with the want, specifically Jif, okay? We are a Jif family. Anyway, I go downstairs, I'm on my way to go get peanut butter, and I don't know why that I didn't turn on the lights. I don't know, I thought, surely this is, my house. I have bat sonar. I know where all the furniture and everything is. I don't even need to turn on the lights. I just know naturally where they are at. And that was, I turned a corner, did a piece of furniture. I football punted the corner of our couch in the middle of the night. Now, I was taking pretty heavy steps, and some of you guys already have your hands in your face, your hands in your face in your hands. To say that it hurt would probably be the other statement of the day. I kicked it so hard, I'm almost positive it moved a couple of inches. I kicked it. I saw stars and I almost passed out. There was like, have you guys ever hurt yourself so bad that you go to scream and you can't? It is like every bit of air has left your lungs. It sounded like, like when you used to turn out, like whenever you take a picture with the Kodak camera and you'd hear the sound of the camera flash coming back on. That was the only sound that I could make. Thankfully so, because I didn't want to. That night, I broke my second pinky toe on my right foot. Now, this affected my walk for weeks. For weeks, I had no stability in the way that I walked. But sadly, it happens all of the time. It actually happened a couple of days ago. Again, I woke up in the middle of the night. We have a bookcase in our bedroom, and I just turned a corner too quick, and Ashley was still asleep, and I spoke in tongues. It was bad. It was really, really bad. It happens all the time, especially when I'm not paying attention. And here's my point in saying all of this. If we don't watch our walk, we don't know where we're heading. If we don't pay attention to where our feet are, we don't know where we are heading. I want you to tell your neighbor, look at your neighbor, and say, watch your walk. Watch your walk. In our passage of Ephesians this morning, the Apostle Paul tells the Ephesian church the exact same thing, namely that Jesus is the standard of how believers are supposed to live, how we are supposed to walk. And we do that in two primary ways. So let's get into our text this morning. The first way we will read in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1. It says, "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly beloved children, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But among you, there must not even be a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be any obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God." So the first way that Paul lists for us is that believers are called to walk in love. We are called to walk in love. Paul told the Ephesians the reason why they were to live differently is because they are to follow God's examples of Christ's sacrifice, self-sacrifice seen in the life of Christ. See, the therefore in the passage, the therefore in the first sentence lets us know that Paul is connecting what he's saying here. That Paul is connecting what he's saying in this passage specifically to what he said in the previous section we talked about last week. What he said there and what he says here is that Christians are to walk in what Paul calls the way of love. And thankfully he doesn't just kind of leave it at that. He begins to explain what this way of love looks like. You see, Paul calls the life of Christ what? A fragrant offering. What does that mean? Fragrant offering is usually language that is reserved for sweet-smelling sacrifices that were offered to the Lord as a form of worship. There were different kinds of sacrifices that were offered in the Old Testament. There were sacrifices that were offered for atonement, and then there were sacrifices that were offered as forms of worship. And so Paul called the life of Christ a fragrant offering because it was pleasing to the Lord, just as worship is pleasing to the Lord. Paul called the life of Christ a sacrifice because it reconciled God to man. That was the whole point of Christ's coming, was to be both 100% man and 100% divine and unite in himself God and man again. He was a sacrifice for the sake of others. You see, the Ephesians couldn't physically reconcile people to God by living like Jesus did, but the way that they lived their lives was to be worshipful and winsome. The way that they were supposed to live was to be a worshipful life and a winsome life. Continuing on, the but, and starting the next section, the but signifies a contrast and lets us know that the opposite of walking in love, the worshipful and winsome way of life, looks exactly like the opposite of what he is getting ready to list. Paul does this throughout all of his letters. So let's take a look at what he says. He says, there cannot be a hint of sexual immorality, impurity, greed, obscenity, foolish talk, and coarse talking. The reason why Paul lists these things, I believe, is because they are the exact opposite of a life for the sake of others. If you look at all of these, every single thing that is listed here is for self. Everything that is listed here is for self-gratification. Sexual immorality is for sexual gratification. Impurity means moral impurity, meaning I just do whatever I want to do. I don't have a law that I live by. Greed means I want to not only make as much money as I can. Making as much money as you can is not a bad thing. Greed is when you make as much money as you can to the point of also wanting to take other people's things. It is consuming greed. It is a consuming love of money. And then obscenity, foolish talk, and coarse talking. I don't know if this is the case for you guys, but usually whenever I see these three, it is someone who is trying to fit in with other people. It is somebody who is trying to look cool. It is someone who is trying to look like they belong somewhere. And Paul says that that is not walking in love. This is how the world lives. And we cannot walk in the way of love and live as the world lives, self-centered and focused on self-gratification. Instead, like Christ, like Jesus, the example of Christ is we are to walk in love by living worshipful and winsome lives. A worshipful life is one that is oriented towards God and holiness. It is one that chooses to say yes to God and no to sin, that chooses to say yes to righteousness and no to sin. You see, we orient ourselves to God's holiness in two ways. We orient ourselves to God's holiness primarily through worship. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but it is incredibly hard to stay self-centered when you are truly focusing on worship. When you are truly zoning in to who God is and you're erupting in praise and you're erupting in thanksgiving and you're looking at the face of Jesus. When we're singing Yeshua, my beloved is the most beautiful, when we're singing songs like that, it is easy. It is much easier to take the attention off of ourselves and to put them back where they are supposed to be, to look at God as holy as He is and go, this is where I'm going to direct my praise. This is where I'm going to direct my worship. His holiness and His being is where I want to orient my life. Next, we orient ourselves to God's holiness through obedience. So we could talk about worship. Worship can be somewhat easy. We can all come together and put on songs that we like. We can have a playlist that gets us into the presence of the Lord, that pushes us into worshiping and praise. It's the obedience part that's hard. Obedience, very, very simply, if you want a clear definition of obedience, it's reading and being with Jesus, understanding what He says, and then doing what Jesus says. It's ultimately what it boils down to. And this means that what Christ says is holy is holy. What Christ says is unholy is unholy. What Scripture says we are called to do is what we are supposed to do, and what Scripture says is outlawed, is forbidden for Christians to participate in, we don't get a vote. Obedience means we look at what Christ says and go, I agree with that. I'm going to move forward with what Christ says. You see, the winsome life, that was the worshipful life, the winsome life is one that reflects God's holiness to others. Worshipful life is where we orient ourselves to God's holiness personally. The winsome life is where we reflect God's holiness to others. This is the call of Israel throughout the Old Testament. This is what God tells Israel in the Old Testament. He says that you will be a nation for me. And if you continue reading through, one of the things that he says is so that other nations can see my goodness. They were to reflect God's goodness to the nations. And I have found that the primary way that we reflect God's holiness to others is through serving them. And this can kind of be hard to wrap our minds around, but I want you to hear me when I say this. Holiness is separation that reaches out. You see, God is totally holy, but he does not seclude himself from fallen people. He does not seclude himself from his sons and daughters who have walked away. We see this in the garden. What happens? It's Adam and Eve who begin, they choose to sin, they're kicked out of the garden, but God immediately runs to them and makes atonement for them and calls them to himself. The minute they step away, the minute they sin, God's grace goes into effect. Holiness is separation that reaches out. It is different. When we say holiness, when we say holy, we mean different. We mean unlike something else. We mean set apart. And when we talk about holiness, for the believer, when we talked about sanctification for the believer, what we're meaning is that we are in the process of being set apart for service, set apart for duty. God has called us to something. And so when we orient our lives to God's holiness, when we truly orient ourselves to God's holiness in obedience and in worship, it's hard not to want to serve your neighbor. It's hard not to want to love your neighbor because then it becomes an overflow of the love that you are experiencing from God. You see, this worshipful and winsome life is walking in love because it is oriented toward the other. This worshipful and winsome life is not self-centered. It is not focused on the self. It is oriented towards the other. And I don't know about you, but this sounds an awful lot like the great commandment to love God and to love others. We see this all throughout the New Testament. So the first way that we are called to walk is we are called to walk in love. The second way that Paul calls us to walk is we are called to walk in light. Let's keep reading forward. It says, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them, for you were once in darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light consists of all goodness, righteousness, and truth, and find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. That is why it is said, wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. So Paul contrasts living in light with living in darkness for the Ephesians, emphasizing that living in the light pleases the Lord. When we live in the light, it is pleasing to the Lord. And Paul uses this language of darkness and secrets and deception to describe what life apart from God looks like and the kind of life that believers are not supposed to imitate. Then Paul uses the language of light and openness and goodness and righteousness and truth to describe the life in Christ and the kind of life that they are to imitate. And in my study of this, I believe that part of the reason why Paul focuses on this discussion between open and secret, light and dark and things like that, is because at this time in history, there's what we call the mystery cults. The mystery cults were probably the largest form of organized religion at the time in the ancient world. And Ephesus was a hotbed of cultic worship. If you remember reading through Acts, as soon as they get to Ephesus, I keep wanting to say Ephesus. As soon as they get to Ephesus, the goddess that's being worshipped there is Artemis. And there is a cult, there is a temple to Artemis. You can still go to Ephesus to this day, go to the ruins of Ephesus, and the facade of the temple to Artemis is still standing to this day. And so you can go and stand where I believe that Paul's trial took place, where he was ran out of town, what I believe was on the temple courts of the temple to Artemis. And part of the reason why this is important is because it was a secretive cult. It was called a secret cult because only the initiated knew the secret message. Only the initiated, only those who were close, only those who had participated in temple prostitution and offered sacrifice to Artemis and things like that were told what the religion was ultimately about. But the opposite of that is Christianity. The opposite of that is the gospel that Paul preached, where he would go stand on a street corner and say, like, I have nothing to hide. I'm here to tell you who Jesus is and what it means to live in his kingdom, what this gospel is. That is what Paul is contrasting here. And for us as believers, that means that we walk in the light by choosing to live transparently. We live in the light by choosing to live transparently. And I know that that's hard. Living transparently is very, very hard. I want to give you guys a couple of ways in which we live, or which we are called to live transparently. I believe that we are called to live in transparency through accountability. We're called to live in transparency through accountability, and that involves inviting others into our lives, which is hard. Inviting others into our lives, trusting that they have our best interests in heart, and then saying, tell me what's wrong with me. If you're married, you probably already have this person in your life. They will tell you what is wrong with you every day. But I think we have to, in order to show you how important this is, in order to tell you how important this is, I think that it is appropriate to think of sin as cancer. I think that it is appropriate to think of sin as cancer. It is an invading force. It grows rapidly and it spreads. And what you think is going to start off as something small, before you know it, you get another scan a few months later and it has exploded into something bigger and it's spread in multiple places. Sin is a cancer that easily grows and spreads. Would it not be better to have multiple eyes on it? If sin is a cancer that spreads, would it not be better to have more trusted, loving eyes on our life to say, you need to get that checked? I had a mole on my arm. Cancer runs in my family, specifically skin cancer. Shocker, I've got red hair and I'm about as pale as white can be. So skin cancer runs in my family. I lost a great aunt to it. My grandparents have had skin cancer. And I had a bump that popped up on my arm. It looked like a mole. And I went to the dermatologist because my mom, last time I was in Charlotte, looked at it and said, you need to go get that checked out. I didn't ask her to, but she is someone in my life that can look at me and go, putting on some weight. I'm like, yep, I am. Thank you for noticing and pointing that out in front of everybody. And she's also someone who can say, that doesn't look right. You should probably go get that checked out. And it wasn't just her, it was several other people. It was Ashley looking at it and going, ooh, that's turning purple. You should probably go get that checked out. It was my pastor at the time in a meeting where I had my arms on the table, and he goes, that looks like the skin cancer that they cut off my mom. You should go get that checked out. So if sin is a cancer, if we see sin as a sickness that spreads rapidly, you should have people in your life that can look at you and go, you need to get that checked. The thing that you're doing, it starts off as a little white lie, but as your friend, I'm here to tell you that it's grown beyond a white lie. The thing in your life that you think is just flirtatious text messages that you're sending to your coworker, you're not just sending memes back and forth. There's something going on there. You need to go get that checked out. You need to take that to the Lord. The 1 to 2 drinks before you go to sleep, and then before you know it, it's turning to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to a whole bottle before you go to sleep. You need to have somebody in your life to look at you and go, you need to go get that checked out. That's not judgment, that's love. It's not judgment, that's love. So we live in transparency through accountability. That's the first primary way. The second ways we live in transparency is through honesty. And we live in transparency through honesty by being honest about our struggles with sin. It's okay to have a group of people that you share your struggles with. And when I say a group of people, I mean people that you trust, people that you know love you. It's okay to be honest about your struggles with sin. It's okay to be honest about your struggles with relational pain. It's okay to be honest and say, listen, when this happened in my life, it messed me up for a really long time. And I'm just now getting over it. The relational pain that I've talked about the last couple of weeks, I'm just now at the point where I can just briefly describe some of the relational pain that I went through. I've talked with a handful of other people about the fullness of it, and it's a lot. It's a lot, but you can have people in your life that you can be honest with about your relational pain. And then the two hardest is honesty about our needs, physical, emotional, relational, spiritual. This is what I need. When someone in this body, when someone in this church asks you how you're doing, I want to challenge you to be honest. I want to challenge you to say, it's hard. Life is hard right now. I want to challenge you to say, hey, I don't know how I'm going to cover rent this month. I want to challenge you to say, yeah, I don't know. My wife has flown off the handle. My daughter is going crazy. My son is doing whatever he wants. Like, you have the freedom to be honest with your brothers and sisters who are around you. The very reason you've been placed into this community is for that purpose. The very reason you are placed into a faith community is so that you can have brothers and sisters to lock arms with you and pray you through it and walk with you through it and to help meet the needs where they can't. I can't even begin to tell you how many stories I have, not just of my personal life, but of friends and family, of people coming into church and saying, oh God, my car keeps breaking down. I don't know what's going on. And then the next week they show up to church and there is a set of keys to a new car sitting on the chair because someone in the church overheard that story and decided to bless them with a car, an extra car that they had. My mom and dad are probably the most generous people I've ever met in my entire life. And if I had $1 for every time that they have just given a car away to somebody, I would have $4. I was going to make it sound like a huge number, but it's actually 4. They've given away 4 cars to people. And the Lord just keeps blessing them because they keep posturing themselves to bless other people. And then being honest about our walk. Being honest about our life with the Lord. One of my favorite things when I talk with people, Ashley and I, we led a small group last year. We'll be leading a small group again this semester. I've participated in small groups before where, I don't know if there's a thing, of course, this is not going to be a thing with your small group, okay? So I'm talking about the small groups that I've had growing up. The small groups that I've had coming up is everyone brings their A game, and they want you to think that they are the most spiritual people in the room. You come together and it's like, how's life going on this week? And it's like, brother, I woke up at 3 a.m. and prayed for 6 hours before I got to work this morning. I've fasted all year. I have not touched a bit of food. I haven't even thought about water. This morning I woke up and I was levitating above my bed. And it's like that. I love when I'm in small groups with someone, when I'm in small groups with people, and you can just be like, gosh, my prayer life is terrible. My prayer life is terrible. This week I've struggled to get into scripture. I haven't memorized anything this week. To be honest with you, the reason I've missed church these last 4 weeks is because of this, and this. I feel hurt. I'm offended. Listen, that is okay. It is okay to be honest about where you are. In fact, I would argue that Scripture commands us to be honest with one another. And if we're going to live in obedience, we're going to orient ourselves towards God's holiness. That means that we live in obedience to what God says. So, wrapping up, earlier I said that if we don't watch our walk, we don't know where we're heading. And I use that language very specifically because I wanted to differentiate that from that of destination. There's a difference between heading and destination. Destination is the end goal. It's where you are going. Heading has to do with course. It has to do with direction. And I believe that many of us, if not most of us in this room right now, know where we are going. We know where we are going as we trust Christ for our salvation, as we trust Christ with our life. However, it is possible to know where you are going and still not have the walk right. It is possible to know where you are going. How many of you guys have ever typed in a destination to GPS and you take multiple wrong turns, but you still get where you are going? You always hear that recalculating sound on your GPS. Our faith is a lot like that. We have a destination where we are heading. There is a goal to our faith, but sometimes we cannot have the walk right, and that's partly because in the evangelical world, in the United States and in the West, we have focused on getting people to heaven. We have focused on the destination. Very rarely do we cover the walk. Very rarely do we cover the process of us getting to the destination. Jesus never called us to make converts. He called us to make disciples. And disciples involve our walk. Being a disciple involves the way that we live, the way that we think, we act, we interact with others. All of that is a part of discipleship.
We hope this message encouraged you in your walk with Jesus. If it did, like, share, or drop a comment to help spread the word. Click the links below to learn more or see what's coming up. And if you're in the area, we'd love to see you on a Sunday. Thanks from all of us at VCLC.